Contrary to the long-held belief that nothing works, decades of research in recent memory have proven otherwise. Donald Andrews and James Bonta really started the process of using meta-analysis to take hundreds of criminological and psychological research studies to identify what the factors are that are most associated with reducing recidivism and changing criminal behavior. Their work, initially published in the 1990s, has been succeeded by many other prominent researchers and continues to be validated today. They identified 4 major principles to capture these best practices: risk, need, responsivity, and fidelity. Often referred to as the R&R principles, which unfortunately leaves off the very important matter of fidelity, these are the basis of what research-based smarter sentencing really is. The risk principle explains that there are these factors called criminogenic risks that are associated with the likelihood to reoffend. In other words, if I present with a number of these criminogenic risks, it's a safe bet that I will reoffend once released from detention or incarceration. But the risk principle is really about operationalizing our knowledge of these criminogenic risks. If we know what these criminogenic risks are, then we can begin to screen people and place them into risk categories. Those with few or none of these risks are low risk, and those with many of these risks are high risk. What Andrews and Bonta and others like Latessa and Lowenkamp have found is that if we can categorize people involved in the criminal justice system this way and cater our interventions to their risk level, we end up with better outcomes. There are a number of criminogenic risks, but the most useful ones tend to be those that we can use to quickly categorize people. Because of the volume of people in our justice systems, these quick indicators are more likely the ones that we will use. The strongest criminogenic risk is previous criminal history. The best predictor of our future behavior is our past behavior. Age at first arrest is another commonly used criminogenic risk. It turns out that there are a number of factors associated with likelihood to commit new crimes that are changeable and treatable. And if we can treat or change them, then we can presumably lessen someone's likelihood to commit new crimes in the future. The research affirms this notion, and thus we have the need principle. The need principle simply says that we can assess these criminogenic needs and target those needs in order to change a person's behavior, away from the criminal antisocial behavior and toward the pro-social law-abiding behavior. While some of these seemed obvious to the field, like substance abuse as a criminogenic need, for instance, others were more revolutionary to our field, like associating with antisocial peers and presenting with antisocial temperament. Smarter sentencing tells us that we need to sort out who is low risk and high risk relative to the likelihood to reoffend, and that we need to focus our efforts on certain criminogenic needs in order to be most effective at promoting pro-social behaviors. Now, the next principle, the responsivity principle, explains that not only do we need to target these criminogenic needs, but we need to make sure that our treatment and intervention strategies are catered to the specific learning styles, cultural backgrounds, and experiences of the individuals we work with. In short, we need to meet offenders where they are and set them up for success. There are a number of implications for correctional programming that derive from the responsivity principle. Men and women, for instance, should be treated separately. Training or counseling programs for offenders should focus on interaction, role-playing, and active learning, rather than classroom-style lectures or passive learning. Programming should be community-based rather than disconnected from those communities where the offenders will eventually return. And the list goes on from there. Research-based smarter sentencing still has a number of other lessons to teach us about promoting behavioral change, not only in corrections, but in pretrial services as well. First, we need to reward good conduct more often than punishing poor conduct. Many of our own experiences tell us that when we are trying to change behavior, incentives are important, not just punishments. The research corroborates our experiences. People learn new behaviors faster and maintain those behaviors longer when approached with carrots rather than sticks. In fact, the research explains that we should optimally provide 4 reinforcements for every 1 negative reinforcement. Sanctions are important, but we also need to celebrate when defendants and offenders are meeting their benchmarks. We can provide them an incentive to make progress. Second, in those cases when we do need to respond to misconduct, the response should be swift, certain, and proportional. Again, providing carrots does not mean that we abandon the sticks. Many of the men and women we work with in the criminal justice system have poor self-regulation skills. They need reasonable and consistent structure and boundaries. Part of that structure is providing the positive reinforcement I just mentioned, but another critical part is administering swift, certain, and proportionate responses to negative and unacceptable behavior. Unfortunately, many of our systems are built to create delay between the offense and the response. Think, for instance, of how long it takes to get through a probation violation hearing in many jurisdictions. However, some successful programs have found ways to provide a series of sanctions that are available immediately to probation officers as one way to enhance their practice. Third, when we provide services and supervision, we want to make sure that we are using the right doses. Behavioral change takes time. Offenders in treatment need that dedicated time to learn and practice pro-social behaviors and to get other necessary treatment services. If we spend too little time, those individuals can more easily regress when they return to their communities. If we spend too much time, we waste precious resources on individuals who no longer need it, and we create other barriers to successful reintegration by continuing to demand time from them. Fortunately, the research provides us with some guidance. Generally speaking, we start with greater intensity and then taper off. Between 40 and 70% of offenders' time in the community should be consumed aggressively during the initial 3 to 9 months of their reentry. Estimates range from 100 to 300 total hours of treatment. Just as we learned from the fidelity principle, unless we use the right approach and right dosage, we cannot expect to get the intended result.